Welcome to Horsemen. Episode 6, The Red Dragon.
And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems on his heads. His tail drew 1/3 of the stars of heaven, and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, who was ready to give birth, to devour her child, as soon as it was born. Book of Revelation, chapter 12, verse 3. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Wealthy Dutton, Jr. spent the first 6 years of his life in Corpus Christi, Texas, until his father was transferred to Plattsburg, New York, an hour's drive south of the Canadian border. Hubert, or Bertie as he was known by his family, was 9 years old at the time, and not at all happy about the move. He did not like the cold, and he did not like the snow. And so young Hubert took to holding up in a corner of their home and reading. Early on, it was detective novels, but it wasn't long before he switched to history books. And from that point forward, that was all he read. Hubert's family moved 6 more times before he graduated from high school and enrolled with an ROTC scholarship at the University of Ohio to study history. After 2 years, he transferred to the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. Though he had a powerful build and an intimidating countenance, he remained bookish and tended to keep to himself, reading and thinking, and mapping out the details of what he had learned. This was something that was important to Hubert, mapping and continuity. He wanted things to fit. Nothing made him happier than to see a through line, a connection, something that gave context to a moment in history that otherwise seemed random or accidental. Hubert did not believe in the random or accidental. All historical events are connected by causality, he would say to classmates. The apparent mistakes of the past are as vital to our present as its successes. We need only see them in the proper light. Hubert's formal, almost Victorian way of speaking earned him the moniker Shakespeare, which he regularly tried to shake off. Shakespeare was no historian as far as he was concerned. The bard was happy to change the events of the past to suit his narrative needs. No, he did not like his nickname. But then, who does? Another officer had been given the name Moss because his body hair was so extensive and thick. So Hubert decided to be grateful for Shakespeare. It could be much worse. Hubert found great success and comfort in the Naval Academy. He loved the organization and sobriety of it. Everything had its place and protocol. Nothing was incidental or irrelevant. And even when he was critical of the reasoning, he could always count on a reason. After graduation, he became a Marine platoon commander during the Vietnam War, where he was awarded the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, and the Purple Heart. Hubert was known not only for his courage, but his calm, unwavering ability to lead within dire circumstances. He was promoted to captain after the war and was transferred to Marine Corps headquarters in Arlington, Virginia, where he was operations officer for the next 4 years. After being promoted to major, he joined the National Security Council in Washington, D.C. And this is where things began to get a little odd for Hubert. This was where his sense of continuity and context was truly tested. For the next few years, his focus was primarily on the invasions of Grenada, Libya, and Nicaragua. Then he was introduced to Lieutenant Colonel Mike Angelino, who was working for the CIA, and who had a unique and initially confusing proposal for him. Angelino asked that they meet at his military office in the Navy Yard, south of Capitol Hill. When Hubert arrived, he was led to the office, and Angelino asked him to sit in the chair across from him. After a few moments of silence, he said, "I'd like to show you something, Major." Hubert watched as the lieutenant colonel pushed a folder toward him. Hubert leaned forward, took the folder in his hands, and opened it. Inside were a series of photographs. The one on top was a photograph of the iconic Roswell alien, or the apparent remains of an alien pilot of a spacecraft that supposedly crashed in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. Hubert knew the photograph and was immediately disappointed. Really? He thought to himself. We're really going to talk about conspiracy theories? Was the lieutenant colonel about to say that the U.S. military was in communication or collaboration with aliens from outer space? Hubert looked up at the lieutenant colonel and narrowed his eyes suspiciously. No, it's bullshit, said the lieutenant colonel. There were no aliens, obviously. No spacecraft. Not even the surveillance balloon that was the official explanation. All of that was bullshit. But the next photo is what I wanted you to see. Hubert glanced at the lieutenant colonel and turned to the next image. It was of a young man, probably in his late 20s, early 30s, sitting in an empty room, as if he were being interrogated. Hubert could see that there was something off about the man, something a little chilling. That's a photo of Larry Earl, the senior officer said. Something creepy about him, right? Something that feels wrong? Hubert looked a little closer, and he could see that this Larry Earl was actually looking up toward the camera with a slight smile that was indeed creepy, if not outright evil. Sir, asked Hubert, meaning, what am I looking at? Military was stumped back then, but eventually we figured out that Larry Earl, a resident of Roswell, New Mexico, created the mass hysteria that led to the Roswell alien sighting. He was able to put the event into everyone's mind. Hubert continued to look at the lieutenant colonel and waited for more. This wasn't making much sense. He put an image in the collective minds of an entire town? Instead of offering more, the lieutenant colonel nodded to the folder as if encouraging Hubert to look at the next photo. Hubert tried not to look frustrated, but he did not like how the lieutenant colonel was introducing whatever he was introducing. It seemed overly dramatic and inefficient. He would prefer the commanding officer just tell him what he wanted him to do. But he played along and turned the page. And there was the famous face of Charles Manson, the crazy leader of the California cult that resulted in at least 2 murders. So, Charles Manson, as you no doubt know, had a remarkably powerful control over the individuals in his cult. But you might not know that his power didn't stop after he was arrested, charged, and put away. There were over 24 accounts of severe illnesses and even death from people in the courtroom when he was charged. Jury members, officers, even some reporters. And the prison where he is still serving in California has to keep him in a special cell because prisoners in nearby cells kept going crazy. And you remember his Helter Skelter stuff? Hubert nodded. He did know about it. He had studied it in the early 80s, when there was several conspiracy theories floating around and connected to the Beatles. He had read about how Charles Manson connected the music of the Beatles' White Album with prophecies in the Book of Revelation to predict a race war between the white population and the black population of America. It had made no sense to Hubert, and he had dismissed it as the ramblings of an insane person. Hubert leaned back in his chair and did his best to calm the frustrated incredulity now surging through him. Something to it? Manson was a lunatic, top to bottom. The Book of Revelations, which Hubert had studied several times, was extremely easy to interpret however you wanted. The metaphors were flexible and broad. It could mean anything. And the Beatles? Paul McCartney? Ringo Starr? These were the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse? Hubert didn't believe what he was hearing. Not the race war part, the lieutenant colonel continued, though clearly this country has a big race problem. No, but there does seem to be something to a set of practices that he created based on the Beatles' song Helter Skelter and the Book of Revelations. Some kind of, supernatural power that he developed and then used to influence people. And he isn't the only one. These files here, they're about people who have similar skills. The lieutenant colonel pulled a box of paperwork onto his desk. A box? Thought Hubert. A box full of paper? What was this? The 1950s? None of this is digitized and online, said the lieutenant colonel again, as if he knew what Hubert was thinking. We're keeping this operation analog. Operation, sir? Asked Hubert. Operation Red Dragon, said the lieutenant colonel. We want you to form a team to investigate these people with supernatural abilities and skills and learn how they access them and how they are using them. Then, with the right personnel, we'll use the protocol and perhaps some of these individuals to develop applications for national defense and security. Hubert nodded his head slowly. Now he understood. The U.S. government wanted to track down and study people who could manipulate and influence others with their minds. Once they had a solid understanding of how they were able to do this, they'd create what the U.S. government always created with Vanguard research: weapons to use against their enemies. This was what the U.S. government did. It was the inevitable application of any research or intelligence. Hubert considered the matter for a moment. He knew he needed to make a decision in the next few seconds. He was being given an opportunity to lead a covert operation that would result in potentially massive changes in military protocol. This was superhero stuff, the kind of thing you'd see in popular culture, but that the armed forces had traditionally scoffed at. It was science fiction, conspiracy theories, the world of imagination and spiritualism, not the pragmatic, just-the-facts world that Hubert lived in. But perhaps this was why he was being offered the position. Perhaps his no-nonsense approach to data and causality was exactly what an operation like this needed. Measurables, scientific protocols, objectivity. I understand, sir, he said with a quick nod. How shall we begin? The lieutenant colonel smiled briefly, and then he pushed the box on his desk forward. Your office is ready, he said, handing him another piece of paper. And here is a list of recommendations for personnel, people with expertise in neuroscience, psychology, and psionics. Psionics, sir? Asked Hubert, unfamiliar with the term. Oh, psionics, said the lieutenant colonel with a brief look of discomfort. It is also called parapsychology. Psychic abilities, telepathy, clairvoyance, ghosts, that sort of thing. Ghosts, thought Hubert. But he maintained a straight face. This was going to be a unique operation, and one that would likely run its course quickly and without much result. Ghosts and psychics had no place in the U.S. military, he thought to himself. This was a wild goose chase. Thank you, sir, he said, standing up. I'll put together my list. And budget? Whatever you need, Major, said the lieutenant colonel, and gave him a quick salute. Major Hubert Wealthy Dutton, Jr. saluted back and felt a slight flush in his face. Whatever he needed? This was not an answer he had ever heard in his career with the military. Perhaps he was underestimating what he was about to encounter. If his budget was open-ended, then those who controlled the purse strings must know something that he, clearly, did not.